Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another live stream on the History of I podcast. And today I'm joined by Dr. Robert and Bryce. And we're going to be talking about early Christian heresy. So we're going to be looking at the early church heresiologists and what they say about what they deem to be early heretical movements. How accurate and reliable are they? Because some people out there will say, we got to dismiss everything the church fathers are saying. They're just BSing us 24 hours a day. But we think differently over here and think that, no, I don't think we can just blanks. What's the word I'm looking for? We can't just generalize all the fathers as being nonsensical speakers, people that are just making stuff up 24 hours a day, fabricating everything that they say. I mean, some people will go as far as saying that they make up the stuff they criticize, or doesn't make any sense. Why would you create the problem that you don't like to try to solve it? That's just stupid. So what's your take on it, Bob?
Well, I think that the notion that it is made up by the heresiologists who are trying to hold up these guys to ridicule and say, you see what nonsense this is. Oh, no, you should believe in what we say in the good old early Catholic tradition. This reminds me of a couple of actual historical parallels, at least the claim of some folks like the great David Litwa, whose work I generally love. However, I differ on this point. They're basically saying that we can't trust all these crazy, intricate, far out systems of thought that these heresiologists attribute to these people. Just as you well said a moment ago, well, then what are you saying? Where does it come from? And the parallels that they do not explicitly draw. But this, I don't know how to say this exactly. It's sort of parallelomania. You know, we have what they see as a problem here, which I don't, as I'll explain in a second, is what actually appears to be the truth in terms of the accounts of what the medieval witches were doing. That's all codified in the Malleus Maleficarum, the witch's hammer. Where did they get all these crazy views that the old bags were having sex with Satan and flying through the air on their vacuum cleaners and so forth? Where did they get it? There's no real reason to think that these old gypsy women, whatever they were, really thought these things, at least not to the crazy degree. I mean, who knows? You know, they could have been wacky, or Margaret Murray could have been right, and that they were just kind of surviving pagans who believed in the old Celtic deities, the horned god, and all that. That's not unreasonable. But are you saying with Irenaeus and Hippolytus and Tertullian describing Marcionism and Valentinianism that was just made up too? Because why did they make it up in the case of the witches? Well, they wanted an excuse to burn them at the stake, or to crush them under stones and all these awful things. And so that, and they would say, okay, old lady, this is what's going to happen to you unless you confess all the sinister stuff you've been doing, and then, okay, no thumb screws. And naturally, the old bags would say, yeah, anything you say, yeah, give it to me and I'll sign it. Just let me go. It seems to me that what Litwa and others are implying is that it's something like that, only you can't really draw the parallel because there's no analogous scenario as to why their persecutors would make the stuff up. They weren't in power yet to persecute witches simply as, or I should say heretics, and saying they believe such terrible blasphemies, they're leading people to hell, we've got to kill them. Now, later on, they did, but these guys are all too early for that. There was no Christian state power at the time. And so it seems to me that there's no way to really explain a wholesale fabrication of Gnosticism, for instance. And so that puts me in mind of a different parallel, which I think is a true parallel. What you have here, like with Litwa's works in his book on the Naascenes and Marcion and Valentinus and Basilides, he says, let's just bracket all those weird descriptions by the church fathers and look at the actual surviving fragments that are attributed to them by Clement of Alexandria and Hippolytus and some others. That we can be pretty sure these guys said. And so let's just use that as the basis. Well, this sounds a lot like the Jesus seminar to me. Let's reduce the database to a bare minimum, then start sketching a historical Jesus based only on that. Well, you got to wonder if you're not reducing the evidence to the vanishing point to where the only alternative is skepticism and agnosticism. And of course, technically, yes. I mean, we don't have taped interviews with these guys. Like when I interviewed Thomas Altizer once, too bad we don't have interviews with Valentinus and all that. But what is being suggested? Nobody would doubt that there were Valentinians, there were Marcionites and followers of Basilides and all these other guys. Somebody believed this stuff. And it's the only point of contention that it might not have been the individuals whose names these heresies bore. Are like when we say, well, we know what early Christians thought, but the question is, did Jesus actually teach this? They thought he did. They claimed he did, but there's a lot of water under the bridge. Okay, we might start asking that question, but I would say that since we can't verify that, well, to some degree we might. For instance, if the Gospel of Truth was actually written by Valentinus, it does appear to be more simplified in its Valentinianism than the much more Baroque descriptions of the church fathers. But that still doesn't mean Valentinus didn't create all of that. He might have, he might not have, but we don't. Why did people bother calling themselves Valentinians? If these things grew by sectarian osmosis, as disciples had their, well, what does Irenaeus say? He says that we Catholics have it right from the horse's mouth, because the apostles heard what Jesus said and taught it to others, without any slippage, without any distortion. Well, that may have happened, but why would you still call it Valentinianism if you had gone beyond it? Like Litwa says, really, it looks like that nobody taught some of this stuff in Valentinianism until Ptolemaeus a little bit later. Well, why didn't they just call it Ptolemaianism? I don't see any particular reason to cut off most of the evidence unless we knew better. And even the idea of conflicting reports. Well, there were whole Eastern and Western forms of Valentinianism, all of which credited Valentinus as the originator of their basic tenets. Well, that's no surprise. Lutherans and Catholics don't think quite the same thing, but they're Christians. And so it seems to me that the dismissal of all the stuff but the fragments is really methodologically self-defeating. You got to ask the question that Martin Kaler asked. He said, if you strip down the Christ of faith to the historical Jesus, as some are doing, you got a real problem on your hands explaining where Christianity would have come from. It must have had something to do with the founder. Well, I'm a mythicist pretty much, so I think there's a limit to that argument, but there's something to it. And plus, if you're going to say these fragments from Simon Magus and Valentinus, etc., they are the only reliable evidence, how do you happen to have those fragments? Well, they occur in a non-polemical setting in writings by people like Clement of Alexandria and I think Tertullian, Hippolytus, and so on. Wouldn't it make sense if they were simply quoting what they liked and agreed with and just sort of left the others in the background? What they could appreciate, they quoted. But it seems to me you can't assume that they were trying to represent the pith of Marcionism, the essence of Valentinianism. Now, why would anybody do this methodologically? Well, it kind of ties in with the reluctance ideologically based, and I'll finish this up in a second, that some people like Karen King and others espouse, that we've made a big mistake thinking there was a single thing called Gnosticism. No, that was just a catch-all stereotype created by these polemicists, that we have to credit each Gnostic or whatever each of these groups as independent types of Christianity. There's no such thing as Gnosticism. Well, the hell there isn't. There are a bunch of different ones that do, as Bentley Layton pointed out, call themselves Gnostics, and they have so much in common with the other ones that don't happen to use the title that it seems to me it's a huge mistake to take that point. You're rejecting the idea of an ideal type. Interestingly, in his book on the Gospel of Thomas, Litwa says some deny the Gnostic character of Thomas, but let's look at the essential features of Gnosticism. What do you know? They're all there. Simply stated, not much developed in Thomas. Well, how can he say that and make the opposite, I should say, argument when it comes to these bits and pieces of the other guys, Marcion, Valentinus, and so on? It just seems to me that he's arguing two different approaches. He, like in his book Found Christianities, which I think is great, what he's doing is to reply to Bart Ehrman. I mean, he's admitted that in his book Lost Christianities, and the point of Litwa's Found Christianities is to say, hey, wait a minute, don't disqualify all these groups as not genuine Christianity. Like when fundamentalist Protestants say, well, Catholics aren't really Christian. Well, Litwa says you can't do that, even with these ancients, that they were Christians too. They understood themselves that way. We're in no position to disqualify them. Well, okay, which is it going to be? Are you going to say that these particular groups not only consider themselves Christians, but should be considered Christians even by more or less Orthodox Catholics, that they weren't really heretics? Well, then where the hell did it come from? And so I see him pulling in two different directions, and I just cannot accept this tendency toward destroying ideal types and saying, oh no, like Helmut Kester seems to be saying there was no such thing as mystery religions in general. What are you talking about? Just because there's a variety of them, there are plenty of basic analogies between them. I mean, when he gets done, the Southern Baptists qualify as a mystery religion. It just seems to me it's counterproductive methodological. And so one last thing, and I promise it will be until you bring up something else, the idea that you can darn well assume the heresiologists were distorting it and making it up. That's what fans of the old heresiologists used to think before Gnostic texts started popping up in Egypt. For instance, they thought, look at the crazy stuff Irenaeus attributes to these Gnostics, and then what do you know? We find various copies of the Apocryphon of John with the same details. And Irenaeus ridicules it as absurd, but he doesn't distort it. He says, here's what they say. And if he didn't, what would be the point of ridiculing them? Get a load of this, he says, and then says, here's what they say. Isn't that stupid? Well, that's up to the reader, but at least he's not making it up. And I wouldn't assume Hippolytus or Tertullian or the others did either. So,
what did the church fathers get right? Like, I know that when the Nagamadi stuff was found, it basically vindicated Irenaeus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the main thing that they got wrong was assuming that all Gnostics were libertines, like the ones referred to in the Epistle of Jude and perhaps in First Corinthians, the stuff about patronizing prostitutes and so forth. Well, really, the whole of the treatment of the errorists, or whatever you want to call them, in First Corinthians, as Walter Schmidtals pointed out, point for point seems to match second century Gnosticism. But the main thing is that when you read Nag Hammadi, you find out that the ones represented there were ascetics. There were two possible inferences from the idea that the true Gnostic is no longer a slave to the laws imposed by the archons. Why should we bother thinking ourselves obligated to that? It doesn't even come from the ultimate God, as Galatians says. So you could say, well, it says, thou shalt not do this, thou shalt not do that. Forget it. We're doing what we want. We're above and beyond that. Sort of the beyond good and evil, as it traditionally defined. The Gnostic wanted to be the Nietzschean Superman, reevaluating all values. But some said, we're free to do anything, but it would be better to starve out the flesh and not let it drag us down into sensuality, because, we'll never become totally spiritually enlightened that way. Well, you have mainly ascetics attested in the Nag Hammadi texts, but elsewhere, like in Epiphanius of Salamis, he speaks of the Fibionites, who used to have sacred orgies and stuff like that he was invited to one and decided never to go back. I don't assume that he made that up. If you had some counter evidence, maybe, but if you're going to just reject everything as well, it might not be true. Well, hey, all historical judgments are tentative and provisional. That goes with the territory. But you can't just reject something because you can't absolutely prove it, if it does make sense with what you can prove about them. And I think both types of Gnosticism ethically fall under that. The warning, we might be misreading it, but also the tentative confidence if there's no smoking gun to say it's not true.
And I think that it's kind of dangerous to dismiss everything the church fathers say with a
Mm,
clean sweep, because it's a lot of information. It's a lot of church fathers.
mm,
I don't think they're in on a grand conspiracy to have a coordinated lie going on. That doesn't make any
mm.
sense.
Yeah, well, I think so. I mean, it's another way of just, it's a kind of polemic for orthodoxy saying, these guys made it up. These weren't heretical forms of Christianity. I mean, they're saying they were, but they're trying to say that modern scholars are in trying to say that uh, this is all distortion. They're being heresiologists. They're trying to discount the integrity of Gnosticism as a worldview or a series of worldviews, and I don't buy it.
Let's take Simon Magus, for example. When you analyze Simon Magus from looking at church fathers and apocryphal texts like the Clementine Recognitions or canonical texts like Acts, how do you methodologically blend that together? How do you handle it?
Hmm. Well, somebody who does perhaps even more than I do is April DeConnick. I just finished reading her book, well, late in the day, finished reading her book, The Gnostic New Age. And she reconstructs Simon Magus much as I do, without some of the connections to Paul. She doesn't think they were the same character as I do. But in my opinion, you you can't just, the same thing, the stories of Simon Magus as a disciple of John the Baptist and all that, that makes a lot of sense in terms of what else we know about Jordan Valley baptizing Gnostics, which Kurt Rudolph talks about in his great book Gnosis. It fits historically. And it also, by analogy, looks quite a bit like the scenario that Eisenman, to me, persuasively outlines, that the Qumran group was the Jerusalem church, so called, and that James the Just was the teacher of righteousness, and that Simon Magus, therefore, was. The John the Baptist and then James the Just were successors, but that Simon Magus was lost out and then won a succession dispute after the death of John, and that he then had a schism with the Ebionite types in the fiercely Orthodox Torah observers there, and started his own thing, as did Dositheus. To me, there are legendary touches to that, but a lot of it, like the idea that Simon was learning magic in Egypt when John died, and so forth. There's nothing at all implausible about that. Once you realize what magic was, these guys thought they could do miracles and all that, or we wouldn't have these many magical papyri that survived. And then the arguments of Volkmar and F.C. Bauer, matching up elements from Acts to material in the pseudo Clementines, identifying Paul and Simon as sort of polemical doubles, counterparts. That seems to me to so illuminate the texts that I find that a basic building block. Again, there's no way to get into a time machine and go back and find out for certain, but all of that stuff sounds very, very plausible to me. And what Eisenman says about the connection between Paul / Simon and this group of Agrippa, Festus, Felix, Drusilla, and Bernice, That's also, and the whole thing with Bar Jesus and Elymas, how that's somehow a retelling of the conversion of Paul's story. It makes so much sense. It's like dots waiting to be connected. Now, I'm not saying I would go to be burned at the stake for the belief in this. Again, all of these reconstructions of the past are tentative and provisional, but the thing about these exegetical paradigms, whatever, are they strong readings, as some literary critics say? Do they make more sense of the text than others? Do they cast new light on it? If they do, well, it might be coincidence, but it's a strong argument that you've hit on the truth. That's all you can say. Can't prove it. But I feel that those methodological things or methodological approaches do cast a lot of light on the whole problem of Paul, Simon, Gnosticism, Qumran, etc. Excuse me. I'm pretty much over my bronchitis, but still coughing a bit.
I'd like to also ask you about how the church fathers assisted you when you read their works, when you put together your book, the pre-Nicene New Testament.
Well, I was willing to accept that the Great Declaration, or however you want to translate it, of Simon Magus, like David Litwa, I figured there's no particular reason to doubt that Simon wrote this. That everybody thinks he did in the early church, who mentions it. So I included that in there on the idea that, as Helmut Kester once said in a class I took with him, that the most inclusive canon is the best. Now, why is that? Well, because of what Hans Kung and so many others say, that, all right, we don't really believe in verbal inspiration, but we do accept the canonical authority of the New Testament because it represents the earliest stage of Christianity we know. Well, if that's the case, if that's the guideline, our 27-book Athanasian table of contents is far from inclusive. And what about Simon Magus, John the Baptist, Gnostics, etc.? What about the Epistle of Barnabas and others? Oh, but that probably wasn't actually written by Barnabas. Yeah, any more than 1st and 2nd Peter were written by Pete, or James was written by the brother of Jesus. It can't be. You have to drop the old criteria of apostolicity. We don't know who wrote these things. But if we're saying we want defining works of the early stages of Christianity, we got to have those voices represented. And that means that you cannot impose a single orthodoxy on this basis. You have to say that this is the seed bed from which different forms of Christianity have arisen and still may arise. I even have a version of the Toledov Yeshu in there, a Jewish supposed anti-gospel, though it doesn't really read that way to me, and Mandean works about John the Baptist, and even Sufi sayings of Jesus, of which over 100 survive, authentic or not. But that's the same way with the 4 Gospels. There's all kinds of stuff that you really need to become familiar with to get a decent picture of what early Christianity was or might have been, because you can't simply Xerox it and say, well, that's what we're doing. Well, it's not that simple. It's been oversimplified by those, like I think Frank Kermode did a great literary critic. He said that choosing a canon is a way of restricting sources of belief or revelation, that we don't want you believing in reincarnation. So let's eliminate the early Christian books that mention it. people have some New Agers have a kind of dim grasp of this when they say, well, they took out reincarnation at the Council of Nicaea. Well, no, they didn't. No, it had nothing to do with that. But they do have a point, because there were very early Christian Gnostic works that did propound reincarnation. What are you going to do? Just say, yeah, they're wrong, to hell with them. No, you can't do that as a historian. And the claims for biblical authority are in large measure based on historical factors, though misapplied. And I think that's what I was trying to do in the pre-Nicene New Testament. The 27 familiar books and another 27 that really are just as important.
Yeah, the church fathers, they tell us all kinds of stuff. Like I think they help understand the way certain things are written. Like, it's helped me in my forthcoming paper on the Gospel of Thomas. Cyril of Jerusalem saying that a Manichaean wrote our Gospel of Thomas. It boggles my mind when some try to claim that it's impossible a Manichaean didn't that a Manichaean could have written it. If you spent 30 minutes reading Manichaean scripture, you would know that that's wrong. It's just I'll just give one example. They both complain about the body being an imprisonment of light, both the Coptic Gospel of Thomas and Manichaean literature. And so basically our physical bodies are entrapped light, and we're trying to break free out of it. And like this is in the Coptic Gospel of Thomas, where it talks about the light being in everybody, and not just that it's in everybody, but it talks about souls being light that are imprisoned in bodies. This is exactly what you see in Manichaean literature, and there's not even a hint of this in the Oxyrhynchus fragments of Thomas that are much earlier than the Coptic text. And so it's like, it just boggles my mind how anybody could honestly say with a straight face that there's no Manichaean connection to the Coptic Gospel of Thomas. I think that's ridiculous.
Well, you have a power of X-ray vision, to refer to my favorite superhero. You're seeing things constantly that I've never suspected, and I am so eager to read these things you're working on.
And it's and again, it's also church followers that give us the information about Marcion's New Testament, or nobody would have a clue of what it said.
Right.
And they talk about the Hebrew gospel, then they talk about the Apocryphal gospel, Matthias, and all kinds of stuff. If you believe the Mar Saba letter was by somebody called Clement, or even Clement of Alexandria, then that would technically be attesting the secret mark. But setting that aside, everything else counts for sure. Why do you think people are so skeptical of the church fathers like this? Why do you think some take it to the extreme and want to blanket with a sweep, dismiss everything that they say?
I think it's because they want to, at the same time, condemn what Christians the Orthodox have always disliked in Gnosticism, and yet receive the ancient heretics back into the fold. They're not so bad. Let's be ecumenical. But there are certain limits. I think it's like when Schweitzer said that all the scholars are reconstructing a Jesus that would fit their approaches, and different scholars do create different Jesuses. I think that's kind of what's happening now. That even the Gnostics and others are being remade like when Harnack already, a long time ago, said that Marcion was the only one who understood Paul, though even he misunderstood him. Well, he's sort of making him into a liberal Lutheran like himself. And that's very difficult to avoid. you have a certain set of glasses on. You're looking at it through lenses that you don't even realize you have. So I kind of think that's what's happening. And or like who is it that says that the idea of trying to dismantle Gnosticism. Oh, there's no such thing as Gnosticism. They're trying to be good postmodernists. I like a lot of postmodernism, but not this. And say that, oh, no, 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 we have to see each expression of so-called Gnosticism as something authentic in its own right and not degrade it by saying, oh, it's just another version of this. That's a ridiculous value judgment to make, even if you think it was a result of sectarian vociferousness, right? The what is it? Mitosis, like a cellular thing, splitting and dividing and growing by that. That's probably what happened with the Gnostics. This one learned from that one, but said, hey, I think I can do better on this point. Just like Protestantism split immediately into a whole bunch of warring sects. And I think it's just like they want to remake reality according to what's dominant in the academy at the moment, without even recognizing it. I guess weirdos like me who are outside the mainstream, luckily, don't have as much of a temptation. Of course, our temptation is to try to make the ancient religions as weird as we are, but trying to keep that under control too.
And when you look at what the church fathers say, they seem to be suggesting that they are aware of texts that they don't like very much, that they seem to suspect came before our New Testament.
Like things that are quoted in the New Testament without attribution, for instance.
Well, not just that, but I'm talking about some texts that they deem apocryphal that is said to have come earlier than our Gospels, like the Gospel of the Hebrews, for example.
Oh, well, yeah, right. Yeah, boy, if only we had that. One day, I hope I live long enough to see that discovered somewhere. We have a pretty decent idea of what it said from all the, like you mentioned with the Marcionite texts. We have a bunch of places where church fathers say that, oh, what do you know? The Gospel of the Hebrews has another version of this. The woman wasn't taken in adultery. She was just accused of many sins. Or the rich young ruler, there were two of them. And one is when he says, I know the commandments, I've tried to keep them. Oh, really? Well, doesn't it say love your neighbor as yourself? You got all kinds of indigent fellow Jews around here. You're not doing anything to improve their lot. How can you say this? Whoa! That was in there. And that'd come in mighty handy in a lot of sermons today, but we barely know that they had it. Well, we're lucky to know it.
When you look at Tertullian, and like you do in the pre-Nicene New Testament, you talk about how, like let's say, like Marcion's version of Galatians, that I think you were pointing out that Tertullian doesn't seem to be aware of Galatians 1:19 being contained in Marcion's edition.
Mm-hmm.
And you use that to help assist you in concluding that it's a later interpolation.
Yeah, this is where, as we now read it, we have James, the Lord's brother. And the argument here, which I'd be proud to claim credit for if I could, but it's older than me. Somebody suggested that where we are reading that Paul made 2 trips to Jerusalem, and it says, again, I went up to Jerusalem. In when Tertullian quotes from Galatians, he doesn't say again. And he doesn't refer to the passage that says, I've met no other apostles except Cephas and James, the Lord's brother," even though that would really have made his point that what Paul was going up to get the imprimatur of the 12. That doesn't fit Marcionism. If he could have quoted that, he would have. And so the argument goes, it must not have been in the copy of Galatians Tertullian had, or he'd have been on it like white on rice, as they say. That's, you don't have any actual manuscript evidence, but it is a powerful argument from silence. Again, I guess it doesn't prove anything, but it really is suggestive.
What do you make of Tertullian's conclusion about Galatians and certain things that he said, like Marcion finding Galatians?
You can't be sure. I keep saying that, but it's true that this is correct. But when he says, when Marcion discovered the letter to the Galatians, that seems kind of odd. Do you mean the first time somebody said, "Hey, you ought to read this epistle"? Oh, let's see it. That's one not unnatural reading, but why would he say it that way? If it's possible, he meant that Marcion found the epistle to the Galatians. That reminds me of Huldah and Hilkiah and those guys luckily stumbling on the book of the law in the Jerusalem temple underneath all the old attendance rosters and Sunday school books and all that. Hey, what is this? Or in Tibet, many texts, they say, "Oh, what do you know? We dug these up. They must have been written long ago and hidden in times of persecution." Yeah. Or Joseph Smith, "Hey, take a look at the golden plates I found on Hill Cumorah." What? These things are, it's just a kind of, it goes with the territory to say, look what I found. I think it's well worth exploring that possible reading, that maybe he means that he thought Tertullian discovered it, but claimed that it was an older work, when in fact Tertullian, that Marcion claimed that he had found it, but like Joseph Smith did, that actually he wrote it. But Tertullian isn't saying that. I'm just saying I suspect his remark is like that of Joseph Smith or Hilkiah, and that in fact that hints at fabrication.
What do you make of the Elkasites?
Jewish Christians with a bit more of a visionary angle to them, and apparently Mani had been raised as an Elkasite, and of course he went way beyond what Elkasai, if there was such a person, had taught, but they were kind of related to the Ebionites apparently, but based their beliefs to some degree on visions of whoever Elkasai, or he stands for, had claimed to have seen a giant angel and so on. That's kind of carried over into Manichaeanism too. That's
interesting. Continue.
There's a great book on this esoteric doctrine of reincarnating revealers. Tor Andrae, Andrae, his book Mohammed, Mohammed, the way he spells it, Mohammed, the Man and His Faith. It's a little bit older than today's revolutionary re-examination of Islamic origins, but on this and other points, it is very fascinating. And he talks about the Islamic doctrine of the prophetic office of Muhammad in light of, well, as the latest example of this doctrine that the Manichaeans, the Elkasites, the Ebionites, and others had for a long time. And that Muhammad and all these guys that claimed to be the Paraclete, and there were others, that they were in this sequence. And there's even more that he doesn't get into because it's later than his intended scope, of Ismaili Shiite Muslims that carried on the same thing, and their belief led to the Baha'i faith and to the Druze religion. It's enormously interesting. And in fact, that casts light retroactively on the Paraclete and the beloved disciple in the Gospel of John. As Bultmann says, it may well be that the Paraclete was supposed to be another human being who would give you the definitive take on Jesus. I'm convinced of that, but I'm going way far afield here.
And in my last question, what do you recommend for individuals that are confused about the church fathers and how to read them, considering the mixed feelings about them in scholarship?
I would say Litwa's Found Christianity is very good. It doesn't really get into this controversial stuff about cutting them down to size based only on the fragments. He gets into the beliefs of and there's more attested than I ever thought there was about the different early Christian groups, Gnostics, etc. That's a very good book on it. And also, I think April DeConnick's The Gnostic New Age is very informative and very readable.
As usual, everybody, I'll have the links to Bob's books in the description below and also in the pinned comment, and also the link to his Substack, among other stuff. And that being said, Bob, thank you for joining me today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron, and or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during your live stream. Thank you.